It's their first taste of freedom. Researchers are releasing several Przewalski horses into the wild, but they survived captivity and are now being reintroduced along the Mongolian border with China.
In 1986, a group of zoo-born horses was flown halfway across the world and released into one of Earth's harshest deserts, a place so barren that locals had given up calling it land. No grass, no reliable water, and winters that plunged far below freezing made this project sound like a guaranteed failure. What followed wasn't just survival. It was an ecological miracle that defied scientists' expectations about reviving lifeless landscapes. How could these horses awaken a sleeping desert? And why did their footsteps transform a wasteland into a thriving ecosystem? The death of an ecosystem. By the mid-1980s, the Junggar Basin in China had become a symbol of environmental collapse, unlike anything most scientists had seen. Locals no longer referred to this vast region as land. They called it the place where nothing grows. The soil was not just barren, it had chemically and biologically hardened into a crust so impermeable that rainwater refused to soak in, instead running off and evaporating within hours. With no water absorption, grass seeds could not germinate, and the nitrogen levels that once sustained life had dropped so dramatically that soil samples resembled lunar dust. This sudden transformation was not the result of a natural disaster, but rather a slow-motion ecological collapse, triggered by one key factor: the disappearance of wild horses that once thrived there. For more than 10,000 years, the ecosystem had evolved with these horses as essential architects. But by 1969, the last confirmed sightings of Przewalski's horses vanished, and the landscape began to unravel. Without their hooves pounding the ground, the soil lost its natural tilling process, turning into what researchers called biological concrete. The fallout was, honestly, really devastating. Satellite images from 1982 showed the Gobi Desert expanding fast, swallowing grasslands, farms, and even whole villages at a rate of 70 kilometers per decade. Then the dust storms from the Junggar Basin rolled across northern China and kind of blanketed Beijing and other cities with toxic sand, which triggered spikes in respiratory illnesses. There was also this notorious storm in 1983, where 43,000 tons of dust fell on Beijing in under 72 hours, enough to overwhelm hospitals, and it basically paralyzed everyday life. China tried to answer with big-scale projects like the Green Great Wall, basically planting a forest barrier that was supposed to stretch about 4,500 kilometers to slow the desert's advance. But it didn't work because the trees needed more water than the land, now drying out, could provide. In some places, the water tables dropped by 12 meters, and the planted forests died from the roots up, almost like it was inevitable. So villages had to be moved due to depleted wells. Alternative tactics like sand-fixing grids and drought-resistant shrubs just couldn't hold the line either. As desertification worsened, agricultural productivity in the Xinjiang province fell by 34%. And computer models warned that Beijing itself could become almost uninhabitable by 2050. The crisis hit a tipping point, but the remedy that would later surface sounded kind of strange to even think about: a scheme to reintroduce the wild horses that had vanished for decades. It was more than conservation, honestly. It was a bid to flip back a near-apocalyptic environmental slide. Even with sharp skepticism from the scientific community and government officials who insisted it would fail, a small group of Chinese ecologists was convinced these animals had the key to rescuing the region. They claimed the instinct and the broader ecological role of the Przewalski's horse could turn dead ground back into something breathing. Still, the central issue wouldn't go away. How could horses born in captivity, never truly exposed to the wild, possibly live through it and then kickstart such a shift in one of the harshest deserts on Earth? Understanding the mystery of this ecological rebirth begins with looking closely at the horses themselves, creatures unlike any other horse species alive today. The forgotten wild horses. Przewalski's horses are remarkable not just for their history, but for their biology, which sets them apart from all domestic breeds. Unlike horses bred for speed or strength, Przewalski's horses have 66 chromosomes instead of the usual 64. a genetic marker showing they never evolved through domestication. This makes them the only truly wild horse species left on the planet, a living link to the Ice Age, their ancestors painted on cave walls tens of thousands of years ago. However, by 1985, this wild horse was hanging by a thread. The entire global population had been reduced to about 900 individuals, all held captive in zoos around the world. The species had passed through an extreme genetic bottleneck, descending from just a dozen or so horses captured between 1899 and 1903. After World War II, the numbers plummeted to a mere 31 animals, with only 9 able to reproduce. Their survival was a fragile miracle, preserved in a handful of European zoos. The wiping out of wild Przewalski's horses in their original habitats sort of happened fast and in a full way, with the last verified sightings in the Yungar Basin noted in 1969. After that, their absence caused an ecological disaster, straight up. Still, the stubborn resilience of their lineage led to a bold conservation push to bring them back. China's plan basically leaned on importing horses from zoos in East Germany and also from the United States, and it started a multi-phase attempt to return them to the wild. The whole thing didn't just mean let animals out and call it done. First, researchers set up a breeding center in Jimsar, where the horses adjusted and relearned key wild habits inside wide semi-wild enclosures. It was a recognition, sort of plainly, that after 3 to 4 generations in captivity, these horses had drifted away from survival know-how, like how to find water or how to spot predators. The goal was to restore the culture of survival that's carried maternally in wild herds. In that early group, there was a young stallion named Hong, and later he took on a role that turned into a sort of legend. Even so, with this carefully staged plan, experts worldwide still had doubts. Survival experts estimated maybe about a 15% chance that they would even get through their first cruel winter. Several ecologists dismissed it as an expensive bet on an already doomed story. But the horses meant more than just rare animals. They were seen as an ancient ecological engineering function, the kind scientists believed could help jumpstart repairs in a landscape damaged by years of neglect and environmental mismanagement. To understand why this was possible, we must first look at the failures of human attempts to fight the desert and why nature's methods proved far more complex than anyone expected. Why the desert was doomed. Before releasing the horses, China had already invested billions trying to halt desertification through human-centered engineering projects, but with little success. The most ambitious was the Green Great Wall, a forest belt planted to block advancing sand. While well-intentioned, these trees demanded enormous amounts of water, far beyond what the increasingly dry soil could sustain. As a result, groundwater fell dangerously low, compromising village wells and slaying many newly planted trees from their roots upward. Other efforts included sand-fixing grids made from straw and the introduction of drought-resistant shrubs. None of these measures managed to stabilize the desert's relentless spread. The problem was not a lack of effort, but a misunderstanding of the desert's ecological dynamics. Without natural animal activity to break up the hardened soil and recycle nutrients, these human solutions fought a losing battle against biological degradation. The soil's hardness, often described as biological concrete, prevented rainwater from penetrating deeply, essential for seed germination and plant growth. Even when rain did fall, it quickly ran off or evaporated before it could nourish the land. This created a vicious cycle. Dead soil led to less vegetation, which in turn allowed the desert to keep moving, burying productive farmland, roads, and even train tracks. By the mid-1980s, the situation was dire enough that agricultural output fell away big time, and that put the livelihoods of millions in danger. Even Beijing, of all places, was getting hammered by dust storms coming in from the desert, the grit layering up over the city, and somehow emergency room visits kept climbing fast. Computer models said that if nothing shifted soon, China's capital could be barely livable within about 30 years, or at least that was the warning. So, knowing traditional engineering basically didn't work, researchers like Yang Jianming started pushing something different, like trying to fight the desert head-on with machines and trees. Their view sounded almost wild, because instead of all that, They wanted to restore the old ecosystem engineers that had kept the steppe going for ages, the wild horses. A lot of people dismissed it at first, but still the idea stuck, and it became more profound than any other human-designed patch. For agricultural people, urban planners, and ecologists too, it was a desperate gamble, yet somehow it was tied to an evolutionary solution that took shape across tens of thousands of years. The real question stopped being whether wild horses were truly gone, and became whether they still do what nature had engineered them to do, breathe life back into what looked like a dead desert. Every hoofbeat then felt like a small lever, moving toward the revival of a lost world. With the stakes clear and the horse's unique history understood, the next step reveals how this bold plan actually played out against overwhelming odds. The bold rewilding plan. In 1985, facing ecological collapse, Chinese ecologists proposed a daring solution: bring back the wild horses. Led by Yang Jianming, they argued it was time to stop fighting the desert with bulldozers and trees. Instead, they wanted to restore Przewalski's horses, the original engineers of this landscape. To officials, the idea sounded like fantasy, yet years of failure left them with no choice but to try. The project unfolded in 3 phases. First, China imported zoo-born horses from East Germany and the United States to a breeding center in Jimsar. These animals had never roamed free or faced nature's harsh tests. Next, the horses were taught to live semi-wild in vast enclosures to rebuild survival instincts. Finally, the plan called for full release into the Kalamaili Nature Reserve, a 4,000 square kilometer desert. Skepticism was kinda intense. A bunch of experts doubted zoo-born horses could really make it through brutal winters, scorching summers, ice-cold water, or predators. Most people predicted failure, like it was throwing good money after dead soil. Still, Yang pressed on, insisting that the horses' worth was not just survival. It was more than that. They were ecological engineers, even if nobody really wanted to believe it. One of the first arrivals was a young stallion called Hong, easy to spot because of a white blaze across his face. Hong turned into a small beacon of hope and stubborn endurance. Yang said, and sort of emphasized it again and again, that every horse reshaped the land with each step. Their hooves punched through the hardened crust, opened pathways in the soil, and built a patchwork in vegetation that then helped insects, birds, and little mammals stick around. What they did showed up in 3 main ways. First, brute strength. Each hoof worked like a jackhammer, cracking the desert soil. Second, picky grazing. They seemed to dodge delicate new plants, and instead focused on bare or dead ground, so basically they were doing a kind of landscaping without meaning to. Third, their manure carried seeds and fed microbial communities that had vanished while the horses were gone, but questions still kept circling. Could horses born in captivity over generations handle wild extremes? Would instincts, tucked away in DNA, wake up and guide them across the desert? And could these animals, while relearning how to survive, also bring back a dying ecosystem, step by step, bit by bit? In the end, this bold experiment wasn't only about rescuing a species. It was more like a test to see if life, steered by old instincts, could restore a barren land with no human interference, or at least as little as possible. The question loomed large as the time for release approached. What happened next would challenge everything known about survival, adaptation, and restoration in desert ecosystems. Survival against all odds. The horses arrived in late 1986, stepping off a cargo plane into a desert landscape that seemed doomed. Temperatures would plummet to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter and soar above 104 degrees in summer. Water was scarce, sometimes buried beneath 4 inches of solid ice miles away. Yet, despite all the obstacles, the first months were a desperate fight for survival that defied all expectations. Early on, botfly infestations swept through the herd, with larvae burrowing painfully into their stomachs and compromising their nutrition at a critical time. The team at Jimsar watched helplessly from a distance, forbidden from intervening unless the entire herd faced extinction. The horses huddled through brutal sub-zero winds, their distinctive manes frozen solid, some unable to lift their heads. Snow buried sparse patches of grass under more than 3 feet of powder, making food nearly impossible to find. But slowly, something extraordinary began to happen. Stallions discovered how to break ice with their hooves to reach water beneath, a behavior never recorded in captivity. Mares formed protective circles around foals during storms, using their bodies as shields and rotating positions for warmth. The horses figured out how to paw through snow, uncovering hidden grass that domestic horses never seek. They started reading the wind and snow patterns, recognizing where to find food and refuge. It was as if generations of captivity had not erased instincts dormant in their bones. The wild was waking them up. By spring, evidence flooded in that the ecosystem was responding. Grasses began to sprout again in areas grazed by the horses, growing back 43% thicker, an effect known as compensatory growth. The horses' pounding hooves hammered tens of thousands of tiny craters per hectare into the ground, which captured and held rainwater that otherwise would have evaporated quickly. Nitrogen levels jumped by 37% in just 2 years, pushed along not only by manure, but also by gut bacteria coming back into the soil, sort of reanimating the microbial communities that had been missing for decades. Then botanists recorded the startling return of more than 20 plant species that were believed to have vanished, with their seeds waking up from dormancy after almost 20 years. All in all, the desert wasn't dead anymore. It was starting to breathe again, or at least that's how it felt. Making it through that one cruel winter was really only the start. The horses had to face second, third, and fourth winters too, and each time they got through it with more and more ease. As the vegetation came back, insects returned by the millions, and then birds, little mammals, plus predators like foxes and wolves followed right along. That whole chain reaction set up feedback loops, speeding up restoration in ways no human plan, no matter how clever, had ever done. Of course, the work wasn't finished, but the horses showed the improbable. Animals that had been bred in captivity still somehow remembered how to be wild, and more than that, they helped a damaged ecosystem revive, step by step. The transformation that followed would astonish not only the local communities, but even the world's top ecologists, forcing a rethinking of how nature heals itself when given the chance. A living landscape restored. The survival of the first dozen Przewalski's horses sparked an ecological transformation in the Younger Basin. By the late 1990s, their numbers and the recovering land allowed a bold experiment. In August 2001, 27 horses, including the stallion Hong, were released into the Kalamaili Nature Reserve with no human support. Initially cautious, the horses soon spread out, with Hong leading his harem over 30 kilometers to a hidden spring, revealing instincts long thought lost. As the herd expanded, the ecosystem responded. Satellite imagery showed green patches spreading from their roaming areas. Grasslands returned to terrain once sealed in dust and stone. The water table, declining since the 1970s, stabilized and even rose. Horse hooves reshaped the soil, forming micro-reservoirs that captured rare rainfall, while their grazing maintained resilient grasslands. Nutrient-rich manure seeded plants and microbial communities absent for decades. Ecologists recognize the horses as ecosystem engineers. Economic benefits followed along. Each horse generated an estimated $47,000 every year through ecosystem services, like soil repair, water holding, seed dispersal, carbon capture, and biodiversity support. By 2023, the herd was up to more than 500, managing land areas larger than many national parks and producing over $25 million a year in ecological value, too. That success gave a kind of spark to rewilding efforts worldwide. In Mongolia, Hustai National Park, and in Kazakhstan, the Golden Steppe put into place similar releases, and they watched what looked like the same kind of ecosystem rebound. Russia also looked more closely at the approach, saying that species with an evolutionary track record can rework landscapes better than interventions that humans designed in the lab. Looking forward, China plans to widen the Kalamaili Reserve and grow the horse population to 2,500 by 2040. The Outlook claims this might restore more than 100,000 hectares, lock in tens of thousands of tons of carbon, and make room for hundreds of distinctive species. The Junggar Basin now serves as the example, showing how releasing wild hooves can help reverse desertification, which suggests nature itself is the most effective engineer. The incredible comeback of Przewalski's horses in the Junggar Basin teaches us that nature often holds the key to healing itself. By embracing these original ecosystem engineers, China transformed a lifeless desert into a vibrant, thriving landscape. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible tales of nature's power to reshape our world. And don't miss the next video featured on your screen for another amazing journey into nature's wonders.